In the winter of 1987, a team of 5 researchers vanished without a trace in the Alaskan wilderness. They were there to study the extremes of winter, to document the unforgiving power of nature. But what they found was something no science could explain. Their journals were recovered months later, buried under layers of ice and snow. The pages tell a story of survival, of terror, and of something that should never have been found. This is not just a story about the cold. This is a story about what happens when the line between reality and nightmare blurs. When the storm becomes a living thing, and the wilderness hides secrets no one was meant to uncover. The team was led by Dr. Evelyn Carter, a renowned climatologist with over a decade of experience in extreme environments. Alongside her were Mark Harris, a survival expert, Sarah Lynn, a biologist, James Porter, a geologist, and Daniel Reyes, the team's medic. They were seasoned professionals, hand-picked for their expertise and resilience. Their mission was clear: to study the effects of prolonged winter storms on remote ecosystems. But what began as a routine expedition quickly turned into a fight for survival. They set out on January 12, 1987, equipped with state-of-the-art gear and enough supplies to last 3 months. For the first 2 weeks, everything went according to plan. They collected data, documented wildlife, and braved the brutal conditions. But then, the storm hit. And with it, something else. This is their story. A story of courage, of desperation, and of the unknown. A story that begins with science and ends in darkness. The first 2 weeks of the expedition were uneventful, even peaceful. The team established their base camp in a remote valley, surrounded by towering pines and endless white. They worked tirelessly, collecting samples, recording temperatures, and observing the local wildlife. It was hard work, but rewarding. For a brief moment, it felt like they were conquering the wilderness. But the Alaskan wilderness is unpredictable. The weather can change in an instant, and the team knew better than to let their guard down. They had prepared for the worst: blizzards, sub-zero temperatures, even avalanches. But nothing could have prepared them for what was coming. On the morning of January 28, the first signs of the storm appeared. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the wind began to howl. The team radioed back to base camp, reporting the change in conditions. They were advised to hunker down and wait it out. But this was no ordinary storm. Within hours, the storm had reached full force. Visibility dropped to 0, and the temperature plummeted to -40°F. The team was trapped in their tents, unable to see more than a few feet in front of them. The wind was so strong it threatened to tear the fabric from its frame. For 3 days, the storm raged on. The team rationed their supplies, conserving fuel and food. They tried to stay positive, reminding themselves that storms like this were part of the job. But on the 4th day, something changed. Mark thought he saw something, a light, maybe a cabin. He called the others, and they debated whether to investigate. It was a risk, but staying put was becoming increasingly dangerous. Their supplies were running low, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. It took them over an hour to reach the source of the light. What they found was not a cabin, but an old, abandoned research station. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The team searched the station, hoping to find supplies or a working radio. But what they found was far more unsettling. In one of the rooms, they discovered a journal. The pages were filled with frantic scribbles, diagrams of strange creatures, and warnings written in bold, red letters: "Do not stay after dark." They didn't know it yet, but they had stumbled upon something ancient, something that had been buried for centuries. And now, it was awake. The first night was the longest. The storm howled like a living thing, and the cold seeped into every corner of the cabin. But it wasn't just the storm that kept them awake. It was the noises. At first, they tried to rationalize it: the wind, the trees, anything but the unthinkable. But as the night wore on, the noises grew louder, more deliberate. A knock at the door. Scratching at the windows. Faint whispers that seemed to come from inside the cabin itself. Mark opened the door, but there was nothing there. Just the storm, howling like a beast. He slammed it shut and locked it, his face pale. The others exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said a word. They all knew something was wrong. By morning, the tension in the cabin was unbearable. The storm had eased, but the fear remained. And then, they realized something was wrong. Sarah was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that she had left willingly. But her footprints in the snow told a different story. The footprints led into the forest, disappearing into the trees. The team followed them, calling her name, but the storm swallowed their voices. They searched for hours, but there was no trace of her. It was as if the wilderness had taken her. As the days passed, the remaining team members began to experience strange things, hallucinations, paranoia, and a growing sense of dread. It wasn't just the storm or the cold. Something was inside the cabin with them, playing with their minds, feeding on their fear. They began to see things, shadows moving in the corners of the room, distorted reflections in the windows, and figures standing just outside the door. But whenever they looked closer, there was nothing there. Dr. Carter was the first to hear the voice. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind. But as she listened, it became clearer. It was calling her name. Mark was the next to go. He claimed he saw something outside, a figure standing in the snow, watching the cabin. He grabbed his rifle and ran out into the storm, ignoring the others' pleas to stay. They never saw him again. By the final night, the cabin had become a prison. The storm raged outside, and the entity had grown bolder, more aggressive. They knew staying meant certain death. But the storm outside was no safer than the terror inside. They had no choice. They had to leave. Bundling up in whatever layers they could find, they prepared to face the storm. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. The cold was unbearable, the wind cutting through their layers like a knife. But they pressed on, driven by the faint hope of survival. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller and smaller, until it was nothing more than a dark smudge in the distance. At first, they thought they were alone. But as they moved deeper into the forest, they began to feel it, a presence, watching them from the shadows. It moved through the storm like a shadow, always just out of sight. But they could feel it, closing in, waiting for the right moment to strike. They ran, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their legs burning with exhaustion. But no matter how fast they moved, it was always there, just behind them, just out of reach. Daniel turned to Dr. Carter, his voice trembling. "We're not going to make it." Dr. Carter didn't answer. She just kept running, her eyes fixed on the horizon. But deep down, she knew he was right. The team's journals were found months later, buried under layers of ice and snow. Their bodies were never recovered. But the story they left behind is a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wilderness, and the darkness that waits in the storm. When the search team arrived, they found the cabin frozen in time. The journals told a story of terror, but the bodies were never found. To this day, no one knows what truly happened in that cabin. The journals provide clues, but they raise more questions than answers. What was the entity? Where did it come from? And why did it choose them? Some places are never meant to be explored. Some secrets are better left buried. And some storms are more than just weather, they're alive. If you think this story was terrifying, wait until you hear about the haunted ski lodge in the Rockies. Nestled high in the mountains, it's a place where the snow never melts, and the guests never leave. That's a story for another time. What do you think happened to the team? Do you believe they fell victim to the storm, or was there something more sinister at play? Have you ever experienced something unexplainable during a winter storm? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more chilling tales. From haunted forests to cursed cabins, there's always another story waiting to be told. Stay curious, stay brave, and whatever you do, don't look behind you.